My viewers, it is a pleasure to have with me two members of the Presentation Brothers who have served, whose congregation have served in St. Lucia for some 66 years. In 1947, three young Irish brothers of the Presentation Order came to St. Lucia at the request of the Vicar General at the time to take over St. Mary's College and to continue a program of education in St. Lucia. The brothers were of a congregation founded by Edmund Rice, who had spent a lot of work devoting of his time to the poor and to the marginalized people of Cork in Ireland. Edmund had lost his wife, and his younger daughter was disabled for quite a while, and Edmund spent quite a bit of time looking and taking care of the child. And that prompted Edmund to devote and give his life over to caring for people. And so he founded this congregation of Presentation Brothers. Two of the brothers who are here with me, Brother Delellis O'Sullivan and Brother Mike McGrath, are members of that congregation. Brother Delellis, may I start with you? And could you tell us, why did the Presentation Brothers first come to St. Lucia?
Well, they came to St. Lucia really on the request of the then Archbishop of Port of Spain, Count Finbar Ryan. Port of Spain was also responsible for St. Lucia. In fact, it was responsible for all the islands between Trinidad and St. Lucia, including Grenada. The Archbishop at the time, Archbishop Finbar Ryan, requested the authorities of the Presentation Brothers in Cork, Ireland, if they could help in establishing schools in both Grenada and St. Lucia. Some authorities of the brothers visited these two places, and having seen what was needed and realizing that some help could be given, decided that they would offer their assistance. And so it was decided by the General Council at the time to send brothers both to Grenada and St. Lucia. And that was the beginning really of what was then known as the West Indies Mission. And that began in January 1947. We are still in both islands. In St. Lucia, we're here for another week or so. And after that, we are hoping that perhaps the good Lord is going to provide younger brothers, both locally and elsewhere, to carry on the work which we began.
Brother, thank you very much on that. And you said that in 1947, some brothers came over to St. Lucia. Was Brother Canis Collins, Brother McCartney Sheedy, and Brother Lawrence Reynolds the first of the brothers to arrive on the island?
Yes, these were the first three brothers to arrive. They arrived in Port of Spain, Trinidad, actually, a week before that, and they arrived in St. Lucia on the 11th of January, 1947. They landed in Beaufort, not knowing, of course, that there were two airports in St. Lucia, even then. As a result, there was nobody to meet them. They arrived in the Panam Plain. Panam more or less owned Viewport at the time. As I said, there was nobody to meet them, but they did find their way to Castries, and they didn't enjoy the journey the slightest. They were met at the presbytery in town, and after that was plain sailing. They were given a very hearty welcome by the FMI fathers. They stayed with them for a number of months, and eventually they succeeded in renting a house of their own at the end of Miku Street, the junction between Miku and Chaussee Road. They were there until the fire of 1951, when it was burned to the ground, and with whatever few items they had in it. And that was the end of their stay in town. We moved to Fiji after that.
But brother, you spoke of the fire of 1951, which destroyed the home of the Presentation Brothers at the junction of Chaussee and Miku Streets. But Castries was also ravaged by fire in 1948.
Right.
And those three young brothers at the time played a vital role in ensuring that St. Mary's College, which is the building in which we now located, did not go down in flames. I remember as a youngster seeing Brother McCartan with fire hoses dosing this building to ensure that it didn't go down himself, Brother Canis and Brother Lawrence. But you did not stay in this particular building on Miku Street, which was St. Mary's College then, for too long afterwards. I think in 51 or 53, the school was moved to Fiji. What prompted the move to Fiji?
Well, actually, it was decided ever before the fire to look for a new location. Various sites were examined, and it was ultimately or finally decided that the old military building was the more suitable. And it had already been purchased from the War Office in London. Work had already begun. It would have started earlier actually, but after the 48 fire, those St. Lucians who were affected by the fire in Castries, some of them were moved to that same building. So the restructuring of the building actually was delayed. By 51, work was continuing. It still wasn't ready for occupation by the students, but the brothers had to move. Their house was burned, so they moved to the present house in Fiji where the brothers lived or have been living ever since, which was also a military building. It wasn't fully ready. In fact, Brother Lawrence slept in the back veranda for quite a number of months. He had a canvas preventing the rain from coming in. And they commuted for a number of years, well, for 1 year actually, because in 52, the college building was ready for occupation, and they didn't have to travel into town anymore. But for 1 year, they were commuting from Fiji to centre in town. From 52, the college building in Fiji was in operation.
Brother Mike, I have not asked any questions because Brother Delillis would appear to be more familiar with that part of the history in St. Lucia. But you may have been involved with the Presentation Brothers for quite a bit of time. And around that time, could you tell us what were you involved in at that time and where in the world were you as a Presentation Brother?
1951, I was at primary school. So I left primary school in 53 and went to secondary in that year.
Okay.
And finished in 58 when I joined the brothers
Okay, very
in
good.
Cork.
Now, Brother Delillis, shortly or sometime in the early 50s, another group of young men came from Ireland, from your congregation. We had a Brother Albert White who loved agriculture and who loved cows and who almost made every boy at St. Mary's College a farmer in those days. And in addition to Brother Albert White, we also had Brother Ignatius Flahive and a young man, Brother James, who taught art. Are these brothers still around? Are they still alive?
Actually, no. Two of the men you mentioned, Brother Albert White and Brother Ignatius Flahive, have already gone to their reward. Brother Albert died while he was on holidays in Ireland. He was at the time stationed in Barbados. He went on holidays, but the Lord decided that he wasn't to return, so he took him to himself. Brother Ignatius died rather young. He was diagnosed with cancer. He went to Ireland for treatment and had surgery, but unfortunately it wasn't a success. Brother James O'Connor is still alive, coming near the end. He is no longer the young artist that he was known here in St. Lucia.
But Brother Canis left sometime in the 50s, and he was succeeded by Brother Ignatius, was it?
Brother Ignatius Flahive, yes.
But Brother Ignatius didn't remain too long as headmaster.
He was headmaster really for 6 years.
For 6? Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
55 to 61.
Okay. And during the sojourn of Brother Ignatius as headmaster, we had another young brother who joined the ranks of the teaching staff at St. Mary's, Brother Marcus O'Donovan. Did he not become the principal of St. Mary's as well?
He succeeded Brother Ignatius, I believe. I wasn't in the region at the time. I had left St. Lucia. In fact, I had left the Caribbean and gone down to South America. But I do know that Brother Marcus succeeded Brother Ignatius Flahive.
In those days, one thought that you were quasi-priests in that you wore your habits and you sat in the sanctuary in the church. And people thought that you were almost priests, and they would never have imagined that several of you played football and cricket. I remember you kicking with your left foot. But lots of you played with the boys, played in inter-house matches and the rest of that. Was that part of the orientation of the presentation, brothers? To get involved with sports and the physical activity that they were teaching the boys?
Well, actually, it wasn't the policy, but I think it was the natural tendency. While you have the youth in your favor and you're energetic, you just don't hide it. It's one of the talents you've been given. And I think we all did realize at the time that the day would come when we wouldn't be able to do that. So we might well avail of the opportunity while we got it. Some of us weren't too good at the games, as you mentioned. I can't remember kicking with my left foot. The right foot was bad enough, but the left. Most of the brothers who were capable of playing games, actually my favorite game when I got into it was tennis. Yes. For the simple reason that I played in a smaller space. I didn't have to be running all over the field, but I did get the exercise that I liked.
But what subjects did you in particular teach at St. Mary's, brother?
Well, my main subjects actually were mathematics. I taught these right through for the number of years that I was here. I also taught geography and scripture when scripture was being taught. And I think I filled in as well for a number of other subjects when there was nobody else to be found. And that happened quite frequently at the time when it was very, very difficult to get teachers at the college.
It is amazing that you should mention that you taught scripture at school, because I remember I was introduced to the Acts of the Apostles by yourself and the Gospel of St. Luke. I think also the Gospel of Mark. And I was never able to pass any of those exams in scripture. And up until now, I'm still not able to do any serious work in scripture. But you did a wonderful bit of work at that particular time, brother. And Brother Mike, after you joined the Presentation Brothers, were you posted in Ireland or were you sent elsewhere as Brother Lillis was?
I was posted elsewhere. I went to Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK,
Yes.
and I was 8 years there. And then I was asked to volunteer for Peru. So I
Okay.
went to Lima, Peru, 1972, and stayed there until I came to St. Lucia. I was 33 years. Brother Lillis was there when I went. He was the principal of the school. And when he left, I took over for a couple of years, and then
Very good.
uh,
So both of you were in fact principals of some of the secondary schools at which you worked.
we worked with a group of Jesuits in a place, and
Okay.
the school was called Fe y Alegría, which is faith and joy. And they're a big educational entity in South America. They have at the moment 1,500,000
Yes.
pupils in their schools.
Brothers, at the time, brothers, it must have been difficult in that the school was not supported by government and funds had to be acquired from fees collected from the boys who attended St. Mary's. We didn't have too strong a population of students at the time. Was it extremely difficult to manage the school at that particular time?
Well, it certainly was, especially when we consider what the fees were. The school was a fee-paying school, as distinct from a government school. No government school existed at the time, but the government did pay the teacher's salary, and they gave a certain subvention as well, which mainly covered the science area in the college. The fees at the time, I know it because I was bursar of the college, and I was responsible for collecting the fees.
$18 per term?
In my spare time, $18, no, it was much less. It was $15 for the first 3 years, and it went up to 16 for Form 4 and 5, and 6, I think. There were some parents, in fact, and I recall this very distinctly, who found it difficult to pay the $15 one go. And I had quite a number of letters in the files from parents asking if they could pay $5 a month instead of paying $15 up front. We had to agree, of course, but it simply meant more work for the college bursar because he had to make out a receipt for $5 every month, together with his classroom work. It was difficult, but the staff of the college were very cooperative, and of course we didn't have the ancillary staff there then as we have now. So that the pay sheet at the end of the month, I'd say, wouldn't be recognizable if you saw it today.
Brother, there's a lot of shrubbery and cedar trees growing around the grounds of St. Mary's College. At one stage, the college moved to clear the surrounding area of all shrubbery, and pasture lands were the thing of the day. And one would see several cows in the area of St. Mary's College. Did the Presentation Brothers have anything to do with cows on the grounds of St. Mary's College?
Well, at least one Presentation brother did, as you mentioned already. Brother Albert, even though he didn't come from a farming family, he was born and reared in a town, in fact, but he had certain hobbies, peculiarly enough. Until he came here, his speciality was bees. He was an expert in beekeeping. When he came here and he saw the scenario in St. Lucia, I think he believed that the future of St. Lucia lay in agriculture. And there was quite a large area going to the college, about 22 acres in all, in fact, most of it was still virgin forest. So he decided to have it cleared and to introduce some dairy cattle. And he had a stock of up to 8 to 10 dairy cattle there at one stage, as he claimed the best in the island.
Labor for this must have been extremely expensive to convert this virgin forest into pasture lands.
Well, I suppose if you had to pay for every little bit of work that was done, it would be expensive, but he had his own techniques for doing it. He did have 2 men fully employed, but he also got work done by other means. Some of the old boys of St. Mary's College will remember whenever they got detention, they had to report to the college on Saturday morning wearing their school uniform. Some of them, of course, used to wear it as far as VG Airport, and then they would change their college shirt at VG Airport. And then somebody had the bright idea that perhaps there could be some other method of so-called punishment, and in fact some of those involved were quite happy, and they suggested why not do it on Friday afternoon to avoid coming on Saturday morning.
So they could have gone to the movies on Saturday mornings.
Well, that wasn't mentioned, but I think most people guessed it. Neither did the parents object, of course, and Friday afternoon therefore was quite a busy time, with Brother Albert going around supervising work of clearing the ground.
But I think it is the thing that the boys enjoyed. They took a delight in doing this. You cleared something like 5 or 6 boxes of stones in lieu of one detention. And that seemed to work quite well both for Brother Albert and the boys at St. Mary's. But brother, something must have gone wrong, because things seem to have been going very, very well. And all of a sudden we understood that the brothers were giving up St. Mary's College. Was anything happening in the environment which may have prompted that decision?
Well, I wasn't here at the time actually, but from what I gathered, well, first of all, the policy of the Presentation Brothers at that particular time was changing. In most of our institutions all over the world, the tendency was to give the control of the schools to lay people. And right now, in fact, I don't think we have we don't have the leadership of any of the institutions in which we work, perhaps a few in Africa. In the 70s, the early 70s, there were changes in policy in St. Lucia as regards education, and certain rules were introduced, and we felt really that this was an appropriate time to hand over the leadership or the control of the college to lay people. And that was the reason why it was done. We continued working in the college up to, well, for another 10 or 12 years. In fact, I was the last Presentation Brother to teach at St. Mary's. But before that, we had a number of brothers, including Brother Cyril, who was well known by many people. He was working in St. Mary's College under quite a number of principals, of St. Lucian principals.
You had another brother who was also principal of the college for some time, Brother Joachim Stack. He's now a priest, I believe.
Well, I would change that and say he was a priest. The poor man died a little over 2 years ago, at the age of 92. He was principal of St. Mary's, but at the time he had been ordained priest. He worked in the Leclerc parish initially, and when the brothers left, he was appointed as principal of the school up to his retirement.
Was it satisfying, the work that the Presentation Brothers did in St. Lucia? Did you feel that your mission was accomplished and that you had done what was expected of you and your congregation?
I would say yes, and I think in most cases we also felt that the time was ripe actually to hand over to lay people. We didn't come to St. Lucia to run St. Mary's College. We came to St. Lucia to help St. Mary's College in whatever way we could. But it so happened that we were asked to take on the principalship. I doubt very much if, when the brothers left Ireland, that they expected that within a month one of them would be in charge of a college. But so it happened. And I think by mid-70s, the time was ripe really to hand over and let the local people, the lay people, run St. Mary's College, which they've been doing quite successfully since.